I think there's a lot of politics that is happening behind the scene.
Completely, and we must call it what it is, Thomas. It is political misinformation designed to influence the outcome of an election.
The 360 Experience with Thomas M.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 360 Experience with myself, Thomas Mabaso. Today, I have the National Chairperson of Action SA, Mr. Michael Beaumont. How are you, sir?
Good. Great to be with you. And I think you've got such an exciting platform that I enjoy following myself. So I hope I can live up to the very high standard you've set.
So you do watch the platform?
Yes, I do, whenever I get the chance.
Yeah. So Action SA just had the big manifesto in Ellis Park. What were your biggest takeaways from the manifesto?
Well, I think certainly the focus on job creation can't come as a surprise. We understand that 43% unemployment is the biggest crisis in our country. But certainly I think what was different about that was that we had a representation made by somebody who succeeded in business, who's grown a small business, who understands what business needs from politics. And certainly, you know, the solutions in that regard are unique. We talk very clearly about a universal basic income stimulus, a program to flush money into the economy, to get economic growth going by targeting lower income households who otherwise are dependent upon social grants that, you know, really can't do much than just simply survive on. But beyond that, certainly the programs around reforming our labor laws, ensuring that our budget can be balanced in a way that attracts investment, ending load shedding. These are all key features of growing our economy. I think certainly what was of great interest was Action SA tabling its inclusive economic empowerment policy. We stand 100% behind the empowerment of Black South Africans, but we need to be clear that the policy of BEE has not worked in a broad-based sense in South Africa. Inclusive economic empowerment seeks to deal with that through the establishment of an opportunity fund, through a corporate tax, and that corporate tax would be funding a program of creating opportunity at a grassroots level through education, access to interest-free loans, etc. Basically going at a grassroots level where BEE has never gone before, quite frankly. It comes as no surprise that Action SA was very strong on the issue of immigration. We always have been, but we believe we occupy the rational middle ground on immigration. To our left are the extremists who say that we should have no borders. On our right are the extremists who want to go raiding businesses and acting like a quasi-law enforcement unit. That is why a centrist party like Action SA, who says people must come to our country, but when here, they must come through our borders and they must obey our laws, is vital in a country where this is such a tinderbox kind of issue. And then I think finally, from our point of view, a major focus on the rule of law. Action SA distinguishes itself from all other parties in having a tough on crime and a tough on criminals approach. We think there's way too much discussion about the rights of criminals and not enough discussion about the rights of law-abiding people in our country. So a key kind of center piece of our policy there is to talk about the fact that criminals who commit violent crimes, talking particularly about the crimes like rape and murder, must not be let out ever again. Under an Action SA government, life will mean life, and we will never have a situation again where we have criminals who are free to walk the streets and continue to hurt people when they should never have been free to do so in the first place. There's so much more to say, Thomas. I'll park it there.
But you are free to say it because here we don't have the time. Like we are unlimited. A lot of people have actually said that the 2024 elections are going to be determined by young people. In terms of young people joining Action SA, how is that looking like?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and I've watched this with great interest because when you begin with a new political party, you are obviously watching things very closely compared to where people came from. We've got people in our leadership from the ANC, from the EFF, from the DA, and one of the most incredible distinguishing factors about Action SA is how young our party is. I was informed by our membership office the other day that by virtue of the ID numbers, we can tell that the average age of an Action SA member is 38 years old, which, you know, I think is quite young relative to other political parties. When I look at the list that we have just submitted to the IEC, more than a third of our people are under the age of 40. And I think the best part about that was meritoriously so. We didn't have to go and find young people who hadn't applied or who didn't have strong track records to achieve that. That was just youth excellence that is a part of the DNA of Action SA. And I think from all of those measurements, we are attracting a lot of young people. And the reason why that excites us particularly is that this is going to be the election with the biggest expression of young people in our country. We know that 27.7 million people are on the voters' roll. That's the biggest it's ever been. And that the registration cycles that led to that was largely about young people coming forward. And that excites us because we think young people need to have a say about the old age home that has become the parliament and cabinet of South Africa. But in addition to that, you know, there is an important dynamic where, let's be real, people who have come forward as young South Africans, you know, they are looking at a political establishment that has let them down and let their parents down for 30 years. And I think those people are coming to look for new political parties. They're not going to be coming to vote for any of the so-called established parties. They're going to be looking for new options. And I think Action SA stands above all of the other new political parties as being the most credible because we've contested an election. We've emerged from that election as the 6th largest party in South Africa, despite only contesting 6 out of 278 municipalities. And I think in that way, Action SA is well positioned among young South Africans to be the future that they are looking for.
Yeah, speaking of IEC, a couple of days ago, I was watching that Daily Maverick where they invited a couple of leaders and political parties. I remember Mr. Herman Mashaba was there, and they also spoke about IEC, and they asked him about the DA actually requesting the people from outside to come and observe our elections. So I heard from Mr. Mashaba's response that he was a bit skeptical of IEC. So what is the official position of Action SA towards the IEC? Do you think do you think the IEC actually has the capability to deliver free and fair elections to us?
Look, I must be clear from the outset, I think they do. The IEC as an institution has done well in the past, notwithstanding challenges that existed. But any organization that rolls out elections to over 24,000 voting districts around the country is going to experience challenges in a geography as complex as South Africa. And certainly, I think from that point of view, the IEC and its reputation needs to be defended. And that's why Herman Mashaba delivered remarks at the Code of Conduct signing ceremony yesterday, where he, endorsed the efforts of the IEC and reached out to say you can regard Action SA as a partner in the exercise of free and fair elections. That's not to say, though, that there haven't been challenges with the IEC. As an organization, I think Herman Mashaba was all too familiar when asked that question about how we had to contest the 2021 local government elections as a logo, and they had to go to court to fight for our name to be on the ballot paper. And certainly a number of experiences like that, including, some of the challenges that happen at voting stations. The difference is, though, the institution of the IEC is something that we should protect and uphold. But it is important to remember that when you have so many people involved in an election day operation across 24,000 voting districts around the country, there's no doubt you're always going to have bad apples and bad people who facilitate the wrong kind of things at voting stations, either because they are not adequately trained or because perhaps there's malicious intent. And really, that's where political parties in the IEC have to work together, because it is the fact that political parties like Action SA will have party agents in all 24,000 voting stations, that we will have vigilance and we will be able to detect any issue, raise it, and ensure it is dealt with in the most decisive manner where it is found.
Yeah, so in terms of the DA asking the worst, I would put it that way, the worst to come and help us observe these elections. What is the official position from Action SA? Are you in support of that, or are you not in support of it?
No, I think Action SA, as a part of the multi-party charter, was involved in an exercise of writing to a number of countries, certainly not just the West, but the global North and the global South, the African Union, certainly countries like Zambia and Kenya, which themselves have gone through very recent elections where change has been achieved through successful implementation of free and fair elections. And we were involved in an exercise of that nature. I can't speak to who the DA might write to in their own private capacity, but certainly within the context of the multi-party charter, Action SA was very strong of the opinion that we do want people monitoring these elections. We need to understand that these will be the most closely contested elections and the first elections post-1994 where real change is on the offering to the South African people. And it is imperative that the credibility of whatever result emerges is beyond dispute in any single way. International monitoring is an important part of that exercise. And certainly it cannot be countries in one particular geography or type in the world. It needs to be across the board, and it needs to represent the international community. And I think from our standpoint, we would most certainly have participated in that process, and openly so, because, Thomas, we have to ask ourselves, for those people who react negatively to what it is that I'm outlining here, why? Why would you? If you believe in elections being free and fair, why is it that having countries like Zambia, like Kenya, like the United Kingdom, etc., in our country observing those elections, why would that be a problem?
So do you believe that we're going to have the peaceful elections? Because I remember for a couple of months, I've said that personally, for my personal opinion, I don't think that we're going to have peaceful opinions based on what politicians have come out and said. I remember Isma Khashule saying that there's no way the African National Congress is going to be allowed to rig the elections. He's joining MK because they won't allow ANC to rig the elections. So I thought that, okay, this means that these people are gearing up to deny the election results. So do you think that we are about to have the peaceful elections, or do you think that South Africans should buckle up for these elections?
It's a difficult question, Thomas. I hope and I pray that we are going to have peaceful elections, because elections can't be purely about a result that I want. It needs to be an expression of the South African people. And we need to protect and safeguard that at every single turn. I think political parties that go out there and make some of these statements are gravely irresponsible, and they forget the violence in this country that we have come from in the past, recent and distant, and how easy it is in a country without challenges for that violence to reemerge once again. And I think that they must be called out for what it is. It's irresponsible, and it threatens the life and safety of innocent South Africans, because when these incidents of violence take out, it's never the political leaders who are hurt or killed. They are whisked away by their VIP protectors and blue light brigades. And it's ordinary South Africans who are vulnerable to a public health system, etc., who are left to be hurt. And we need to call it out for what it is. Certainly, Action SA will not be making any statements in that regard. We will be protecting the integrity of this election, not through our words, but through our monitoring at voting stations. And because of that, we are confident there will be an election that is an expression of the wishes of the South African people. And I think South Africans must be punishing of any political party that is irresponsible in the manner in which they talk about these elections and the acceptance of their results and credibility. Yeah.
So the other issue I want us to talk about is the issue that everyone is talking about, the issue of load shedding. What is Action SA actually going to do when they come in power to deal with this matter of load shedding?
Certainly, and I think what's so clear about our work on load shedding is that we've gone ahead and done a great deal of research around the world, because South Africa is not alone as a country who's gone through an energy crisis. Many countries have, both on the continent and abroad. And if you look at a country like Vietnam, Vietnam went through an energy crisis which was solved by their government within 1 or 2 years. And largely because what they did is they put solar panels on the top of every low-income household across Vietnam, which was an incredible achievement just in terms of reversing that situation with urgency. I think what's so disappointing about our situation is load shedding began, what, in 2007 or 2008, and yet it still exists in our life now. That is an indictment on our government, a failure of imagination and leadership, because ultimately what's needed to be done to end load shedding has been known for that entire time. It's just the political will has not existed within the tripartite alliance to do it. And that really is the real tragedy here that needs to be addressed. From our point of view, we have appointed a shadow cabinet and a Team Fix South Africa member for energy, and Paul Madisha. He's an incredibly qualified man, an engineer, worked on the nuclear pebble bed reactor, someone who understands energy, and we're very proud to have that kind of caliber in Action SA. Another young person, by the way, leading, which is a great feature. But from a policy point of view, we are very clear we need to introduce competition into the energy grid. We need to bring in private producers of energy and have them competing with Eskom. And we know that government can play the role of ensuring that that cost of electricity is contained. It is not more than Eskom. But we now need to start having a conversation about the more than 15% increases that Eskom has passed on to South Africans every single year, is that Eskom is no longer pro-poor in its rollout of energy. And actually, a private competition with Eskom can result in cheaper electricity for South Africans. And that's got to be a major feature of our policies. We think municipalities need to be turned into energy producers. I remember when Herman Mashaba was mayor of Johannesburg and I was his chief of staff, we had the Kelvin power station able to produce enough electricity to reduce load shedding stages by 3 stages. If, as a municipality, we had the license to go out there and implement changes. And that really is an example of what we need to be doing to empower our 8 metros and 278 municipalities across the country. We think individual households that are producing their own energy should be able to push that back into the grid. And certainly the same with businesses that are producing their own electricity to deal with the failures of our government in load shedding should be able to supply into microgrids of surrounding communities in such a manner that we can address this crisis, we can address it decisively. And that's why we say there is no question load shedding can be put in the rearview mirror of South Africans within just 2 years if we take these steps. But the problem is a lack of political will. We need to be clear, Thomas, the ANC has come out and made all number of statements to say that load shedding is going to end. And we need to know what this is. That's because there's an election next month. That's what that's about. It would be hard to accept that the ANC has been sitting on the solution since 2007. And as we approach 2024, the solution is in hand months before the election. What we know is going on is that we've come out of a summer month. The demand on the grid will be much higher in winter. They are burning record levels of diesel to keep the lights on purely for the sake of managing their electoral fallout. And the minute that the elections are over and we enter the depths of winter in June and July, load shedding is very much going to return. And you want the best evidence of that fact, Thomas? Action SA won a court battle with Eskom, the energy minister and the president, that required them to provide uninterrupted supply of electricity to schools, to hospitals, and to police stations, because the courts agreed with us that those 3 institutions are paramount to the constitutional rights of South Africans. And as I speak to you right now, the president, the energy minister, and Eskom are in court trying to get leave to appeal that judgment. Now, if load shedding was coming to an end, as they say, why would they be appealing that judgment?
So is Action SA going to be able to remind the people of what they went through? I'm asking you this because if you look at South African voters, they really have a short memory, because right now, if you see what is happening is that load shedding has been suspended for a couple of days right now. I think it's going to go into weeks. And I think, again, it's going to go into what I predicted a couple of months ago. I said that the African National Congress is going to get load shedding under control just until the elections, so that the political parties outside cannot have nothing to campaign with, because South Africans have a very short memory. So if there's no load shedding, South Africans are going to say, oh, it's fine, we have electricity. So there's no need for Action SA to come and speak to us about load shedding when we have electricity. So is Action SA and multi-party going to be able to remind the South Africans that, guys, do not fall for this thing?
Look, absolutely. And I think for what it's worth, we need to give the South African people more credit. Yes, as a country, we are bombarded with crises. And, because we're not dealing with an energy crisis right now, as South Africans, we move on to the next crisis, whether it's our speaker who's just had to go to jail, whether it's the crippling unemployment. There are so many challenges South Africans face that it's true. When we have a respite from load shedding is back of mind. But I do think that giving South Africans more credit is necessary here, because South Africans have been lied to over so many electoral cycles about this particular issue alone even. And I think it has been the case of 3 times bitten, 4 times shy for many South Africans who laugh when they hear statements from the president and from the energy minister to say that load shedding is going to be ended and under control. They know what it's about. They know that the statement is being made on the eve of an election. And they understand fair well that as we approach the winter months, load shedding is going to get worse again. I don't think there are many South Africans outside of the ANC leadership who genuinely think that the ANC has got a grip on this issue. I think most South Africans now understand that the way to end load shedding is to end the ANC. And that principle, I'm afraid, applies not just to load shedding, but to our economy, but to ending the job crisis in our country, to fighting crime, to really doing real combat with corruption. All of these issues will not find solutions unless step 1 is taken, and that is to remove the party from government who has created the crises in these areas.
So I know that Action SA has been laying out the plans how to get rid of load shedding. Other political parties have come out and laid out the plans that, guys, this is what we think we can do to get rid of load shedding. Personally, I'm asking you personally, why do you think there's no political will within the African National Congress to get rid of load shedding?
Well, sure. It's a complicated challenge. And I think really what it comes down to is the fact that if you look at Eskom in 1994, 1995, it is producing the exact same amount of energy now as it was back then, but it was doing it with 1/3 of the employees that it currently has. And there's no question that what we have in state institutions, whether it's Eskom or anything else, is an erosion of the line between the state and the party. And the ANC has seen these institutions as employment agencies for those who carry ANC membership cards. And many talented South Africans who have the knowledge and the experience to perform in these institutions to the benefit of our entire country are denied that opportunity because they don't have the right membership card. And I think in many ways, a lot of the challenges comes down to that. We know it comes down to corruption. Corruption has gutted Eskom in terms of its ability to do its job. But let's also talk for one moment now about the tripartite alliance, because people talk about coalition governments like that's the future. We've been in a coalition government since 1994. The ANC has been in coalition with 2 unelected partners in COSATU and the SACP. And what you will have is a situation where the president or the minister will come out and make a statement about reform in the energy market like we've seen before. And the tripartite alliance partners come in and say, not going to happen. Now, who elected them and who exactly are they speaking for in that process? And what you will typically see is the ANC will then back off because the cohesion and internal harmony of the ANC is more important to the ANC than what is right for South Africa and South Africans. That at the end of the day, they will just simply back off that proposal. And that's why we can have a situation where Minister Pravin Gordhan announced the unbundling of Eskom into the transmission and generation units back in, 2018 or 2019? It's 2024. It doesn't appear like much has happened in that particular regard. And it's just evidence that you have this paralysis of government by unelected tripartite alliance members who block any form of review or reform by the ANC. And that is why I say we've been in a dysfunctional coalition for many years now. And coalition is actually not something as foreign as South Africans realize.
So the other issue I want us to move away from load shedding, the other issue that I want us to talk about is the issue of national health insurance. What is the position of Action SA towards national health insurance? And do you think that the ANC is being genuine with the people of South Africa when they propose this thing of national health insurance and how they propose it?
No, I don't think they've been genuine. And I think that's why what's emerged from the NHI system is announcements rather than any form of real implementation prior to these elections. I think there are still massive questions that remain unanswered because effectively the NHI produces an understanding that the government must provide for capacity in managing and administering the provision of healthcare services, etc. And that capacity doesn't yet currently exist. And that is very clearly a major weakness in the system. But let's be clear, the biggest weakness in the system as it relates to NHI that demonstrates why this is not a policy that is going to work in South Africa is it does nothing to improve public healthcare institutions in South Africa. Tembisa Hospital, Baragwanath Hospital, etc., all of the hospitals of our country that currently offer very poor service to South Africans are going to continue to do so because it is not changing how these hospitals are run, how they are supplied, the professional management of healthcare services and supplies that are needed to administer healthcare services. And those challenges are going to continue to persist because nothing about NHI addresses that particular issue that has crippled the healthcare system in South Africa. Again, I will give another shout out to our shadow cabinet, Team Fix South Africa member in this department, Dr. Khosi Letlape, who is a world expert, the first black ophthalmologist in South Africa, president of the World Health Council, chairperson of the South African Medical Association. And he's been very, very clear about the need to deal with the private medical system to make sure it is more accessible for more people and that it covers people in an honest standard of cover being provided. But at the same time, unless you're going to address the grassroots issues that are providing for the challenges in our hospitals and clinics, then NHI is never going to succeed. And we need to address those issues so that the service provided in those institutions is better to South Africans.
Yeah, and I don't know why is it so hard for these people to actually address these issues that everybody can see, because when it comes to NHI, I said that of course you are talking about NHI, but how about you guys start fixing the hospitals? How about you start fixing the public clinics that we have already? You are not saying anything about that. You are telling people that, guys, you no longer need to go to these public hospitals and clinics that we have broken down. Now, when you need medical assistance, you simply go to the private hospital. You only need a card. And I must say, Mr. Bumonte, that this thing is selling to black people, especially in the townships. It is selling. It is selling.
Look, I think certainly there is an element of people who are desperate for decent quality healthcare services, and any announcement that may, in their mind, offer solution to that particular challenge is no doubt going to generate excitement. But at the end of the day, I still think most people recognize that the grassroots issues that affect their clinics and their hospitals, at the end of the day, cannot best be solved by sending them somewhere else. It's the same challenge we have with our education system. How many people are getting their children up at 3 o'clock in the morning so they can travel all the way around a city to attend a different school because the school that is meant to serve their community is dysfunctional? And the same solution is now being presented in healthcare. Forget about the hospital around the corner. Forget about the school in your community. Let's go somewhere else and get decent healthcare in another community. And that's not the democracy that we signed up for. The idea that those services should be provided in communities is absolutely vital. And at the end of the day, I do not think anyone rationally can look at the ANC with all that it is broken and say, yes, they are going to manage this thing in such a way that the healthcare system is going to improve from a user experience for the people that you're referring to who are excited about this announcement. So I think from that point of view, it is something that I think a reality is setting in for many South Africans, included what I said in the start, that we've had this announcement and then nothing. Because like so many things right now, announcements come thick and fast in the run-up to an election. Implementation leaves a lot to be desired. And I don't think South Africans will readily forget the experience of public healthcare that they've had. I do want to say on this point, though, Thomas, that our experience in Johannesburg, and we're very proud as a party to have leaders with a track record in government. In fact, if you look at the political parties contesting this election, very few of them have any track record in government in their leaders. And the ones that do don't always have a good track record in government. But when Herman Mashaba was mayor of Johannesburg, and I remind you, if Johannesburg were a province, it would be the 5th largest province in South Africa. Serious changes happened in our healthcare system that were possible. Because as you say, this isn't complicated things. These are things that can be addressed. So clinics were extended around the city to be open through the night, on weekends, through public holidays, because of course, people don't just get sick during office hours. And sometimes they need to be at work and get treatment after they get home. And those kind of changes made major differences. We did a lot to improve access to healthcare through mobile clinics, through drug rehabilitation facilities. And at the end of the day, one of the greatest challenges we need to grapple with as a country is we have too few doctors and nurses who are looking after too many people in our country. And yet we have unemployed doctors and nurses and nurse training colleges that have been shut down in our country. How does that make sense? Why do we have to import doctors from Cuba who come here only able to speak Spanish, when in fact we have the best institutions in our country? Around the world, people look for South African medical professionals. They are sought after, and yet our government imports them from Cuba. We need to put more doctors and nurses to work in our country. We need to build more colleges to train them, to get more people to work. And this is a challenge that really is a supply and demand challenge. And we need more of these professionals so we can improve the rollout of public health care.
Yeah. So political parties are all over the place. They are talking about the social grounds, because I believe that political parties right now in South Africa, they understand that if you go against the social grounds, you are not going to get the votes. I understand that the EFF said that they are going to give people 5,000 rand. The African National Congress said that if people do not vote for them, they are going to lose their social grants. The DA said they are going to increase the social grants. So how does the social grants look like in action as a governance?
Well, I think, let me just say, I did have a laugh that I saw someone comment the other day about the EFF's manifesto launch, and said it reminded them of one of those kids who was standing to be prefect in school, who runs around and says, we're going to have 2 lunch breaks and a vending machine in every classroom. You know, promises that can never materialize, but just throwing them out there wildly. And I think on a serious note, South Africans need to be seized by the question of the credibility. It's not just what political parties promise, it's whether we can believe they will be implemented. And from that standpoint, we believe in the continuation of the existing social grant infrastructure and the improvement of it in 2 key ways. Firstly, I spoke about the universal basic income stimulus that is intentioned to ensure that those who are below the poverty lines of our country will receive amounts of money every month going forward over the next 3 years that increase over time from 900 Rand a month up to 1,600 Rand a month in the outer years. And that is not only important from an economic standpoint, but we need to get people surviving more than just the 350 that they've been placed on. We need to ensure people can actually provide for their families and look after themselves in a decent way. And any party that doesn't recognize that the situation in our country requires that network of social grants is necessary is hugely out of touch with the needs of South Africans. But I think we also need to be clear, we should hang our head in shame that 30 years into democracy, 19 million people are dependent on social grants. This should be a number we see come down every year. And as a country, we should celebrate when it comes down. Because every time it comes down is because a person has found a real employment with a real job and a decent wage, and they can look after themselves far better than a social grant will ever be able to. And of course, what that means is government can do more for fewer people with the same amount of resources they had before. And that is an important way of how we can improve the lives of South Africans. But it requires that mindset, because to the ANC, a social grant is an instrument to keep people dependent on the state, and an instrument to ensure that they can go to those people in an election and say, you know, those other people will take away your grant, you shouldn't do that. Where at the end of the day, the truth is that one of the greatest national failures of our country is that there are so many people who are dependent on social grants. That shouldn't be the case. People's lives should be better through the mechanisms provided for in a growing economy. And I also want to say, for what it's worth, when you talked about EFF policy pronouncements earlier, that one of the great anecdotes I love to share is after the last local government elections, there was a radio call-in show where a radio presenter asked listeners two questions. The one was, do you want the EFF to win a municipality? To which I must say a surprising number of people said yes. Yeah. And then the second question was, do you want to live in that municipality? To which everyone said no. I think a lot of people think it would be an interesting experiment out there, but definitely don't want to be subjected to it. And I think in many ways that sums up the experience of the EFF manifesto.
You also mentioned the issue of education. Will Action SA be reforming the current education system that we have? And what will the education look like if Action SA gets in power?
Without any question. And I think, let me again talk about the credibility of the leadership we put forward. Dr. Mpho Mafora is an education expert, the former dean of academics at Damlin College, a former principal, and she runs a professional consultancy that actually deals with fixing broken schools, because that's the caliber of people we put forward from an Action SA standpoint in a shadow cabinet. But without any question, we do fundamentally believe that there has to be an overhaul of our education system, and it has to include a number of important interventions. Firstly, we have to deal with our curriculum. Outcomes-based education and our curriculum has become a disaster, and it is producing graduates into an economy that cannot compete, either globally or even within our country, and that has to change. We need to introduce within our curriculum skills that are going to be needed for the future of our country, and we believe quite strongly as well, skills relating to small businesses and entrepreneurship. Not every person is going to emerge to become a job seeker. We need people to emerge to become job creators in our country. And I think there are some skills that are missing in our education system. This pass mark of 30% has to go. It's not good enough. We need to have higher standards in our education system. And there are a few things that have to be done to achieve that. The first thing is we have to end the death grip that SATU has on our education system. It goes back to that tripartite alliance thing I was talking about earlier, where SATU as a union is actually governing, but nobody's elected SATU. And they are saying to the government, we will choose the teachers, we will choose the principals, we will choose the performance management system, and that's not good enough. It's not that Action SA does not view that regions have a role to play and an important seat at the table, but it's not their table, it's the country's table. And in that regard, it is vital that government, and particularly the education department, takes back control from SATU, the idea of how we appoint people to be principals and educators in schools, as well as the performance management system that means we're getting the best out of our educators, including school inspectors. School inspectors are such an important part of the system, and yet that is still something that is not happening in our country because, again, this issues within the tripartite alliance drives away any sense of performance management from our education system, because it's about the educators and not the learners. And that's what we need to most fundamentally change.
So, you know, the other question that I love asking is that I know people, especially the other political parties, they're saying, okay, we're going to reform the education system. Okay, I'm saying, okay, it's fine. You're going to reform the education system. Let's say Action SA gets in power. You reform the education system. What is going to happen with these students that have been subjected to 30% of Njimutsecha? Do you have plans to improve these people's lives that have been subjected to 30% for so many years?
Without any question. And I think really what you're touching on is the real tragedy of our education system, because what it has done is it has produced a system of school leavers who have no pathway to a future. If you look in real terms, the amount of seats at universities has only increased by a small amount since 1994, for tertiary education, I should say. And the amount of school leavers has increased by a factor of 10 since 1994. And that's a huge part of the challenge. And what you're referring to is this disaster where now as much as 80 or 85% of the 1 million learners who are leaving schools after a matric that doesn't yet qualify them to do much with it, don't have another option. In that regard, Action SA believes that we will be building more universities, more colleges, more FETs, more artisanal schools, so that we can have more people who have options to study and more options to study after they leave school, so that there isn't this hopelessness that we see with young people sitting on street corners in the middle of a working day because there's no future, there's no option, there's no pathway to a better life. And that is why substance abuse has become the epidemic that it is in South Africa, because there are just so many people who leave school and there's nothing beyond that particular pathway. I also think from our point of view that Action SA stands apart from other parties by offering a voluntary year of service to every school leaver who doesn't have an option of further studies to go and work in the military, to work in government departments, and to get the experience that they need to be competitors in a job market and to have the opportunity to study through those institutions. This is an important step because so many young people get told in interviews that they don't have the experience. We're sorry, we can't take that risk to employ you. But if we had government actually saying, come and work with us, gain the experience you need with us, get a feel for what you want for your life, and we can help support you achieve your dreams. That would be a massive change from the current situation, which basically accepts in a cold-hearted manner that 80 to 85% of school leavers don't have any future really from a further development point of view. And that's what we think has to change most decisively.
Yeah, you know, when I talk about crime on the platform, most of the time people will say that, especially people are saying that, okay, we are advocating for provinces to have their own policing unit. What is your stance on that?
Absolutely. Sorry, it broke up a little bit there, but I think I got the question. There's no doubt that policing is most effective all around the world when it is provided for at the most local level. In fact, in many countries who are successful in the fight against crime, their policing happens at a city level, not even at a provincial level. And I think in many ways, if you look at our system of government, our provincial governments have become very strange places where it's quite hard to work out what provincial government does outside of education and healthcare. And they would be better placed to provide for policing and a number of other government functions than national government has ever proven capable of doing so. So I think there has to be a general discussion about decentralizing government functions to the lowest competent level of government. And I say that quite deliberately because a lot of people will be listening to this thinking, oh my goodness, my municipality shouldn't be put in charge of anything else. And that's why I use the word competent government quite deliberately. But I think certainly from a policing point of view, we have some very, very strong positions on this particular topic. And I think here we say to South Africans, we are miles apart from other political parties. If you want the conversation to be about the rights of law-abiding citizens and less about the rights of criminals, Action SA is for you. Because we come out to say, under Action SA, life means life, and we throw away the key. And under Action SA, prisoners aren't going to get free board and lodging in the prisons of our country. They're going to work. And they're going to work to provide value to communities that they have been instrumental in breaking down through their criminal deeds and activities. And we're going to be incredibly harsh with those who commit the kind of crimes that are holding back our societies, our families, our economy, and certainly we need to do more about having a strong criminal justice system. Our police need to have far more support, far more resources, and far more political independence so that they can go and do their job. And ultimately, our prosecutorial services need to be able to go out there and put people in prison through a jail system, through a court system, which is far more responsive and is delivering justice far more swiftly than what South Africans are currently experiencing.
So in overall, as we go into the elections, do you think that the political parties have actually done a good job in terms of voter education?
Absolutely not. And I think there's actually very few things where you will hear me or anyone else applauding political parties generally when it comes to issues like voter education. But certainly, you know, I do think that the IEC needs to be doing more in this regard as well. You know, I think sometimes the IEC relies too heavily on political parties when in fact they are the government institution with budgets of billions and billions of rands. And to expect Action SA as a new political party to go out and provide voter education about issues that the IEC should be doing, you know, really is not a logical standpoint. I mean, I don't know if you know this, Thomas, but I'm afraid many South Africans don't know this. For the first time in a national and provincial election, South Africans won't be getting 2 ballots, they'll be getting 3 ballots. A lot of people don't know that. They're going to learn about it when they go to the voting station for the first time, and they're going to be confronted by this additional ballot paper, and they're going to say, well, what does this mean? And that has to be addressed through decisive education from the IEC. I think the role of political parties is to be clear on how they are different from one another so that voters have choices. The IEC effectively has to play that role to inform South Africans about the elections and how they work. But I'm afraid, as always, in the environment where this won't be done fully, we're going to have to do that as well. I mean, the ballot draw was conducted yesterday at the Code of Conduct signing ceremony, and I'm told the ballot paper is 3 pages long, which is an astonishing understanding. I'm still trying to work out quite how the logistics of that would work. But can you imagine, you now have to go to your supporters as a political party and say, we're on page 2, so that people can go and find you in this environment. Because, you know, let's be real, Thomas, there's way too many political parties in South Africa.
Of course.
And way too many of them are not serious. You know, it's obviously very difficult for a new political party to do well in an election, but it's not difficult for a new political party to register. And that's why we have these ballot papers where it really is becoming burdensome for South Africans to understand their options. And that's why we have coalitions that emerge after elections with, you know, strange players who have no discernible constituency and no accountability for how they behave in coalition.
So have you, as political parties, actually held IEC accountable and saying, guys, you haven't been doing your job in terms of educating these people of what's about to come?
Well, actually, yes. I mean, certainly we have been raising these issues. The challenge we have as a new political party is that our representation to the party liaison committee of the IEC actually only begins now, that we have complied with all of the standards to contest provincially and nationally. Up until now, as a matter of fact, we haven't served on these committees. It's just yet one more way how the political establishment has worked to protect its own interests in a country where people are more and more fed up with the political establishment. But with that gripe aside, you know, we are now going to be represented on these committees, and we're going to be raising these issues because absolutely South Africans need to know this. The idea of voting was never intention that a person would rock up at the ballot box and kind of go, at that moment. The idea is that people over a period of a campaign would gauge opinions and develop their thoughts. If South Africans are confronted by this third and additional ballot paper at the ballot box, you're denying them the thought process that they should be going through in respect of what that ballot paper is intentioned for and how it could be used.
So I saw Mr. Hemen Mashaba and some members of Action SA standing in front of a Saxon World recently, talking about the politicians that Action SA is about to prosecute when you get in power. How was the news actually received?
Well, we think very well from ordinary South Africans, and I think, let's be clear, that's the target market, because ordinary South Africans cannot understand how you can have a Zondo commission that produces so many years, so many billions of rands worth of expense, and so many pages of a report. And yet, as South Africans right now, you cannot point to a single person and say this person has been prosecuted and is in jail right now. That is unacceptable. I mean, as a matter of fact, if you want to understand the full tragedy of the situation, I saw a news article emerge the other day where the NPA was saying they're ready to move forward with 95 cases in the Zondo Commission. And then later that day, the NPA put out a statement saying that was fake news. Can you imagine the NPA after all this time distances themselves from a report that says they may be ready to prosecute? It's such a frustration to the South African people. And let's be clear, the cases that have been put forward in that top 10 most wanted list of Action SAs are not cases where we are conjuring up charges loosely and cases where we are, throwing mud against the wall and see what sticks. These are cases where there are actual investigations that have been done and, in our opinion, are prosecution ready. And what I found most astonishing with those who criticized this event is they criticized it by saying this is political interference in the NPA. No, political interference is what has happened up until now to ensure that these politically connected elites of our country have never faced justice. That is political interference. If a political leader emerges and says the NPA head is appointed by the president and accounts to a committee in parliament, politicians have a role to play with the NPA, not in telling them what to do and who to deal with and to give them lists of people like these are political enemies. But if there are cases that are ready to be prosecuted and they are not being acted upon, absolutely political leaders have a role to play to address that problem, because when our constitution says that the NPA must act without fear or favor, the intention is that if you've got a case that's ready to go against a high-profile, connected person of the ruling party, it goes ahead, because under a rule of law, everyone is equal before the law.
Yeah. So how ready is Action SA for these elections? How ready? What is the state of readiness in the Action SA?
Yeah, we are ready. I think firstly, South Africans who are watching the show will have seen Action SA posters going up around the country. And I think really, if you want to understand what puts Action SA apart from any other political party, is we put posters up in places where the ANC and EFF can't, and we put posters up in places where the DA can't. Because as a political party, we've become a home to people from across the political spectrum. That is why in 2021, we achieved 22% of the vote in Soweto and 21% of the vote in Sandton. And we're very proud to have a party that is that diverse. But importantly, we've spent 2.5 years since that local government election building structures on the ground, Thomas. Because what a lot of people will never understand about elections, and what the pollsters will never understand in our country, and I hope we can have a discussion about the polling just now, because that's become one of the laughing stocks of our political system, is that votes are won on the ground. They're not won on social media. They're not won on TV. It's actually the street corners and the doorsteps of South Africans where votes are won. And there's a lot of political parties that exist only on Twitter. And actually, that's why when the IEC says to them, you must go and get 46,000 signatures to contest the elections, they go off to court to complain about that, where parties like us say, that's a good weekend's canvassing. Let's go and do it. Because if you're on the ground, there's no challenge. Now, the reason we spent all that time building structures in all 9 provinces and across the board, literally in every one of the 52 districts and 8 metros of our country, is that those are the individuals who are carrying our campaign, as I speak to you right now, to those doorsteps, to those street corners, and converting a person today who didn't know enough about Action SA yesterday. And that is why we are confident that we are ready for these elections. Are there challenges? Without any question. The political establishment has rewarded itself with so much money, Thomas, that they are contesting these elections. And it's such an irony that we have a commentariat and, you know, people from these political parties who go ballistic every time donations are disclosed by the IEC. But actually, those donations are a fraction of the amount of money those political parties are getting from the state. Currently, parties represented in Parliament in this year will have received 1.5 billion rand in state funding from the South African taxpayer. When education goes down, when police care goes down, this budget goes up every year without fail, because it's passed by parliamentarians for their political parties to ensure that they remain parliamentarians and new political parties don't come in and challenge the status quo that South Africans have become so gutful about. From our point of view, those are difficult challenges, but we are confident that the volunteer spirit within Action SA that places us on the ground across the length and breadth of our country is going to overcome those challenges. And I think that's why many South Africans see Action SA as part of the big grouping of political parties at the top of the pyramid, because they see us as a real contender, notwithstanding that challenge.
Yeah, I think Action SA has actually done quite well. And when it comes to the poll, you see, after Donald Trump won the elections over Hillary Clinton, that's when I gave up on the polls, because right now the political parties in South Africa, they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing. Everyone says, yeah, according to this poll, our political party is going to do better. According to this poll, our political party is going to do better. So when it comes to polling, I'm trying to stay as far as possible, because I remember what were the polls like in 2015 before Donald Trump actually won the elections.
Thomas, you're a wise man, but you don't have to look as far as America to see what the polls were like. Look in South Africa. The polls in South Africa had Action SA 2.5 times smaller than we really were, because polls are always going to undercount a new political party, and they're always going to undercount a new political party because what polls rely on is a voter 6 months out from an election knowing who they're going to vote for, where in real terms, many of the votes that Action SA and new parties will win will be won in that last 6 months as we engage more and more people. And at the same time, let's be clear, South Africans are no longer sure 6 months out from an election who they're going to vote for in the way they are now. But Thomas, just to continue with this rant, because this is a subject that makes me very angry, is that in South Africa, we have an unregulated polling industry. If you look at the polls that come out, you got this Social Research Foundation, which is run by the former CEO of the IRR, and the revolving door between the IRR and the DA has been a well-established pattern in South Africa. They outsource their polling to a company called Victory Research, which is run by the former executive director of communications of the DA, and wait for it, the currently employed head of research. A current DA employee on the payroll of the DA is the head of market research for this company doing the polling. So what happens? They put the DA at 31. And they say that all the other parties are nowhere to be found. Well, it would be awkward when he goes to work on a Monday morning if he didn't say that, because his bosses will be like, why didn't you, toe the line kind of thing.
Yeah, because because I wanted to ask you about the politics behind these people that are conducting the polls, because I think there's a lot of politics that is happening behind the scene.
Completely. And we must call it what it is, Thomas. It is political misinformation designed to influence the outcome of an election. We've got to call it what it is, because politics and voter choice is similar to investing. You want to vote for a party that's growing and not one that's shrinking. Otherwise, its influence is getting smaller and not bigger, and you want your vote to go where it counts. That's why political polls are being used as instruments to mislead South Africans about where growth and momentum actually exists in our political system. But yet you've got political parties that are hemorrhaging votes in all demographics, in all 9 provinces, and yet they're saying they're growing by 10%. You've got to be able to look at these things logically. If a party is losing all of its support in a major demographic of our country, it's not growing, it's getting smaller. And that is why, you know, more and more there needs to be cynicism about this. If you look around the world, in countries like France, Brazil, Canada, polling companies are regulated. They have to register with the electoral agency or with the courts. And when they come out of the poll, they must tell the people who paid for that poll, you know, who's behind that organization, what was the methodology used, etc. So we can see, I mean, the other day, on the 10th of March, we had 3 media outlets in South Africa that published a poll anonymously and said, we can't tell you where this poll came from. It just came from an organization that's very good at polling. We believe that poll was actually a DA poll that was then given to the media and then published anonymously. We have a complaint before the press ombud, as well as the Real 411 Political Misinformation Center, about the action of publishing that poll, because why would you deny South Africans the information about who produced a poll unless there's an effort to deceive? And from that point of view, we think there's a lot rotten going on in the polling industry. It needs to be regulated, but we urge South Africans to be wise like you, Thomas. If it doesn't make sense, don't believe it.
Yeah, because it sounds like it sounds like election interference. Because if you're gonna link these polling companies and the media spewing out this nonsense, to me it sounds like election interference.
Well, that's exactly what it is, and we need to understand that the reason these things need to be regulated is because every organization has interests and it has conflicts of interest. And it's led by people who have a history with political parties, and the polling industry particularly is filled with people from the political industries. And we need to be very clear about these things, and we need to be aware of the potentials for abuse. Ours is a young democracy. We're only 30 years old. Compared to democracies around the world, we're very young. And we have to keep up with the times. And the reality is, a poll today can go around this country 3 or 4 times through the virality of digital communications, long before the truth can actually get out. And that is why you have these polls coming out, and really they're not worth the paper they're written on, or there's a heavy conflict of interest. And at the end of the day, you've got to ask yourself, why is this information being pushed on the South African people? I mean, the other day, ENCA published a poll, which from the methodology that they didn't initially provide and had to be searched for later, didn't even limit its poll to registered voters. I mean, why would you poll people who can't vote in an election? It makes absolutely no sense from a methodological point of view. And certainly from our standpoint, we were very glad to see that our complaints in this regard and the issues that we have raised have been responded with SANIF, the South African National Editors Forum, coming out and issuing an advisory to all journalists to say there needs to be greater circumspection around the publishing of polls.
Yeah. So for those people who will be voting for what we currently have, I remember this is a question that Helen Mashaba was once asked. What will South Africa look like if Ramaphosa wins the elections again?
Well, I think you can always understand that there's going to be more of the same. In other words, when you have an incumbent whose term of office, and let's call it like it is, there is not one metric of government performance that you can point to and say to me today, this has gotten better since Ramaphosa became president. Whether it's unemployment, whether it's load shedding, whether it's crime, whether it's corruption, education, you keep naming it, healthcare, every one of these metrics has gone down. And at the end of the day, we have to be very clear about this, that if South Africans re-elect a political party and a leader of that political party who has demonstrated since he came to office in 2018 this decline, they can only expect more of the same in that particular regard. In fact, they can expect an acceleration of the same. I think one of the most disappointing features of President Ramaphosa's tenure as president, because let's be real, Thomas, when he came into office, there was a lot of optimism in the country. A lot of people believed this could be the reform we've been looking for across the board. And I think what's been so disappointing about his term as president is that not only has he treated that optimism with scorn. But actually, he has chosen the ANC over South Africa every single time. There was actually a famous interview, which gets forgotten in the melee of South African politics, where his quote at the time was, "I would rather be a bad president than be a president who was known to have divided the ANC." So he was very clear from day one. His agenda is the ANC and the unification of the ANC, not the South African people. And when he is confronted with choices every day in his term of office that requires him to decide what's good for the country that may be bad for the factionalized interests within the ANC, it's very clear what he's chosen over the last few years and what he'll continue to choose if he's given another term of office to do so.
Yeah. Before I let you go, what are your last words to the people who will be going to the polls? I hope we're going to speak after the elections. What are your words to the people who will be going to the polls, and what would you like to say to the supporters of Action SA?
Well, certainly, I think to the people going to the polls, we must know the following. We are 30 years into our democracy this month, an exciting milestone as a country, and we need to be clear that we have been let down by a failed political establishment. Whether that is the establishment that has been in government and has collapsed all institutions, or an opposition which, let's be clear, really has a failure of imagination and leadership, an opposition that wants to be an opposition in perpetuity and has no plans of being anything more than that. That is why Action SA emerging is such an important development in South African politics. Firstly, because we've contested an election and we've emerged from that election successfully, which is more than we can say for many of the other new political parties who remain an untested entity in the minds of the South African people, but also because we offer something different. Our party is led by someone who built a business empire out of the boot of the car in the 1980s, where the apartheid government said he wasn't allowed to do that. He then went into politics after he had succeeded in business. He didn't get wealthy in politics, which is something we should all be more and more circumspect about. And he became the mayor of Johannesburg, where he produced the only time in recent memory where Johannesburg was improving and universally accepted for that to be the fact. He has a positive track record in government, and he has created a political party that doesn't exist here and there. It exists in every one of the 9 provinces. We now have branches in more than a majority of the wards of South Africa, and that number is growing every day. And we're uniting South Africans in a diverse political party that reflects the diversity of our country. We've tabled exciting solutions, real solutions based on practical ways of dealing with the challenges that are confronting South Africans. And we have proven that we will be effective in a coalition environment. We have held coalition partners to account publicly, strongly, and unapologetically, because coalition can't be about a buddy-buddy system. It needs to be about the interests of the South African people. And all of these factors together combine to create the image of a political party that represents the future of our country. It represents hope, and it represents tangible change that South Africans can really come to believe in. You asked the question about Action SA supporters. I just wanted to say, Thomas, I am so deeply humbled by Action SA supporters. There is no humbling experience like what I witness every single day. As a new political party, we do not have the resources that we need to be able to support our volunteers around the country. And yet you see the incredible volunteer spirit in Action SA of people who are going out there in the rural and the urban and the township and the suburb, in the city and the villages, and they are taking that message. They are putting up posters. They are doing that kind of work, and they're doing it because of the love of their country. And I think Action SA has so much to build on, because our foundations are people who love their country, who hate what has been done to it, and who believe we can fix South Africa.
Yeah. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, from the national chairperson of Action SA, Mr. Michael Beaumont. Guys, don't forget to tell us what you think on the comment section. Don't forget to hit that like button. And the most important part, subscribe. My name is Thomas Mabao, so I will see you next time. Bye-bye.